Darkness falls, and the magic of words come alive. I am the Gargoyle. I am your host for this session. Thank you so much, first off, right off the bat, to everyone that's subscribed. We are currently on 59 subscribers. Guys, I'm absolutely blessed that you have joined me here in the dark. Tonight I will be reading Phoenix, Deliverance by Martin Allen. I hope you enjoy it, so settle on in. As always, I am the Gargoyle, your reader on the ledge. Chapter 1. Dark Eagle, protocol active. Dark Eagle, subject en route. Analyzing. Additional resources en route. Terentius Catalina dashed down the streets of Niveo 5, her comlink buzzing with chatter. Another body had been found. Another victim. Initial reports indicated that the cause of death was the same as the others to which she had been assigned. She had to see for herself, though. Local garrisons were notoriously unskilled when it came to recording the evidence. It wasn't though they didn't try, they just didn't have the resources. No one did. The Trada of Doctrina, the arm of the empire to which Catalina found herself attached, was better equipped than most, but still had serious manpower shortages. A suspected serial killer was not the sort of thing the Trada of Doctrina would normally investigate, but the killings on Niveo 5 had raised several worrying red flags. The mission of the Trado was to investigate and eliminate, by trial and execution preferably, the ungodly and the sinners of the empire, protectors of the souls of the inhabitants of the empire. Their mandate to the assigned mission was almost unlimited. The killings on this world had all the hallmarks of a new and terrifying nod to the past of the human race. The ribs had been forcibly pulled back, and the internal organs with them. The bodies had been tied securely to a heavy object, and the ribs and organs pinned back to resemble wings. 3 bodies have been found before the planetary governor had asked for assistance. 2 more before the method used by the killer had been compared with the historical database. Blood Eagle, an ancient religious rite practiced by the primitive North pantheonists before and during the rise of the Christian religion, had matched very closely to the crime scene reports. The 6th body had been found with a burning Invictine Libro Prietas, the holy text of the Invictine religion. That is when the Trada of Doctrina had been assigned to investigate and eradicate the perpetrator. Catalina ran down the cobbled streets. This backwater world reminded her of the descriptions of the Norse lands back on Earth. Even the towns seemed reminiscent of the descriptions. With the exception of the imperial buildings, which were manufactured to a standard specification, the buildings were stone with thatched roof. This world, being rocky and covered in snow much of the year, had little to offer colonists in the way of raw materials for their own use. Thick, fibrous grass dominated the land masses, where the cold stone did not rise up, looming and unforgiving. The empire was here for minerals, buried deep under the rocks. The resultant detritus, the granite bored through to get to the minerals, provided the meager shelter upon which the inhabitants relied. Tin, tungsten, uranium, nobelium, tantalum, gold, molybdenum, and copper were all exported for use in the empire from Niveo 5. These minerals supported the continued imperial presence here, but benefited the workers little. Small outlying colonies, where were the disadvantaged and disenfranchised, came to escape and be forgotten. Their contribution to the empire being labor and little else, in exchange for a quiet life. Whilst it seemed that the empire was content to allow these outliers to be overlooked in their solitude, the empire could not afford to let incidents jeopardize all shipments. After the second body was discovered, a curfew had been imposed as both bodies, been frozen in their gruesome rictus by early rising miners in the cold of the morning. The victims had apparently been killed in the cover of night, though, thanks to the freezing, it was impossible to tie the time of death to a particular time. "Keep everyone back from the scene," Catalina spoke into her comlink in a measured tone that belied the speed of her progress. Catalina did not need to breathe as much as her fellow humans, despite running faster than would normally have been possible. Much of her body had been replaced after she had fallen pregnant with the child of Pontius Capitos, the son of the planetary governor of her childhood world, and she had attempted to abort it by pouring nerve agent forcibly down her throat. The toxins had necrotized her limbs and much of her flesh and organs. She had been transferred to a special imperial compound under Protocol Dark Eagle, where her life had been spared as an experiment into the application of advanced military prosthetics to be used in the role of imperial investigator. This is the first scene the Triad of Doctrina has had to direct. Immediate access to. Sorry for that. I don't want it contaminated. Dark Eagle, protocol active. Dark Eagle, subject en route. Analyzing. Protocol enacted. Progress, satisfactory. The faint flakes of snow drifted down, insignificant on their own, but combined they were an impediment to vision. Catalina concentrated for a moment, and her vision switched from the white flakes to a blue background, highlighted with orange and red, signifying the colonists in the street. Green lines delineated the geographical features, such as buildings and potholes in the street. A mass of orange silhouettes in the street ahead threatened to impede Catalina's progress. Making use of the route her tactical implant suggested, by way of a complicated schematic of red trajectories, Catalina ran straight up a nearby wall, up it and grasped the top of it. Leaving herself to balance on the top edge of the wall, she ran along its length, freed of the need to dodge the slower-moving users of the narrow street. A ring of sour-faced guardsmen from the local contingent formed a ring, holding back a throng of colonists. Catalina leapt from the wall over the crowd and landed within the empty space cleared by the soldiers. Dark Eagle, protocol active. Dark Eagle, subject arrive. Analyzing. "What the?" exclaimed the nearest guardsman, his speech petering out when he recognized the signature black, unadorned armor of the Imperial investigator. At ease, guardsman. While Catalina was still uneasy with outranking almost everyone she met, she did privately admit that it saved a great deal of time on explanations. Catalina had only one previous assignment, and that had no investigative role. She had been assigned to eliminate Capito, the man she had loved and who had betrayed her. The shock of seeing his photograph in the assignment envelope had temporarily sent her reeling, but she had bounced back, realizing that she could make sure she was rid of him from her life forever, and in the process make sure that he never hurt anyone again. His end had not come quickly. She had owed her unborn child that much at least. She had taken that which he had prized, that which had led to her abuse and almost killed her. She had cut, slowly, as he begged as she had begged him to stop, cut while he screamed as she had screamed when he had betrayed her, and killed their child while it was still inside her. Finally, she had stuffed his own penis into his mouth, doused him with petroleum, strung him up from the pier where she had first met him, and set him alight. The match had been tossed negligently over her shoulder as she strode away, not needing to see him die, the debt to her child, repaid in blood, pain, and tears. Your orders, ma'am? Catalina shook herself from her reverie. Have you isolated anyone who may have contaminated the crime scene? Catalina may not have been experienced, but she had been issued with a downloaded version of the imperial procedures for crime scene processing, more than enough to allow her to understand the basics and to prepare the way for the technicians that she had requisitioned from the nearest fully operational transport. Keep them away from each other. I don't want them comparing notes. Get a cover plastic if you have it, and put it over the body after you vid the scene. Use imperial standard objects for scale on any close-ups and measure all the distances. I want to be able to recreate this virtually later. It's the same as the others, ma'am. No, it's the only one that will have been measured properly. I had the computers do the maths on the last few reports. None of the distance worked. They were all over the place. I could only compensate using the vid, and that was poorly done at best. I can only speculate with evidence collected like that. Catalina phrased the criticisms as though they were her own, instead of those of her commanding officer, investigator Posthumus Metallus. Bring me the notes when you finish it, so I can check that they match the vid. From her position at the circumference, Catalina could only see small parts of the cordoned off area. The scene was the least of her worries, though. Her attention was captured by the various personnel working it. All were wearing white full body covers, designed to stop contamination of the scene. Catalina knew they had not been worn on any of the previous sites. She had been ordered to bring them by Metellus. Never trust the military to investigate. If no one saw it, then they don't stand a chance. His advice echoed as she watched and compared actions taken to the digital readout of the manual. Dividing her attention like that was distracting, but she was starting to get used to it. A brief glance at the floor showed bloody footprints. Catalina followed them with her gaze until the trail ended at a white-clad soldier measuring various distances. The trail had originated at the pool of blood by the body. You and you! Catalina pointed at two soldiers who had so far managed to steer clear of the blood. Pick him up and put him in the transport with the other evidence. Don't let his feet touch anything. When you sit him down in the transport, put bags over his feet. Catalina addressed the hapless guardsman directly. Don't move. Don't even blink. You are now evidence in the investigation. The guardsman visibly paled as his compatriots lifted him up by his armpits and carried him to the transport, where the evidence would be stored and transported by the technicians when they arrived. Dark Eagle, protocol active. Dark Eagle, subject deployed. Analyzing. Protocol enacted. Progress. Satisfactory. From that point onwards, the soldiers seemed to take an exaggerated amount of care where they placed their feet. Another of them seemed to want to be anywhere near the body. Not that anyone would want to be within 100 meters of a corpse with its lungs and rib cage rudely nailed to an ornamental tree and its entrails piled at its feet. Catalina wasn't worried about the gap in the notes that would result. The technicians would make their own measurements of that area as a safeguard. If she had arrived before the soldiers had started taking measurements, she would have kept them away from that area. But arriving after they started, as she did, shooing them away would have caused more disruption than leaving them to it. They had started with the body, and it had radiated outwards. It made sense in a way. However, more effective would have been to measure inwards from a series of fixed points, such as the surrounding buildings. Catalina made a mental note to have this raised with her commanding officer. A siren sounded behind her, and she turned. She saw the gathering crowds part to allow access to another transport vehicle. It pulled up behind the cordon, and an elderly gentleman exited and waved towards her, motioning to the perimeter guards to let the man through. Catalina walked over to greet him. "Is this like the others?" he asked. "It would appear that way, Dr. Scribonius, but I think you and your team are best placed to tell me that." "So nice to be appreciated, my dear." Dr. Scribonius patted her arm in a paternal gesture. "So often the Trader is able to manage without my insight, not having the remit to act with Invictus as you do. The case is sometimes concluded before I can complete my test." He concluded with a conspiratorial wink that couldn't help but bring a brief smile to Catalina's face. "Dark Eagle, protocol active. Dark Eagle, subject deployed. Analyzing. Additional resources arrived." When she had instructed Dr. Scribonius, he had seemed somewhat shocked that she intended to rely on his input. The investigator arm seemingly had brought him in, previously merely, to rubber stamp their suspicions. The doctor's impetuous excitement at being used to investigate, rather than as a tick-box exercise, had led Catalina to confide that her crime scene trading was a mixture of implant downloaded material and would be vocational for the practical aspects. For a moment of taking in the obvious scope of her prosthetics in light of this information, the doctor had hugged her close and whispered in her ear, "Oh, you poor dear." It had been hard to keep the tears from crawling down her cheeks as she felt the first genuine human interaction in an age. "Do you think you could get a time of death? If I calculate using the meteorological data from last night, I could get you an approximate time. The time would not be specific to this locale though. It would be simply for this city. The way the temperature affects the buildings, the insulation of the buildings, whether the buildings were heated at certain times, and the periods of shade and light through the preceding day would all affect the body. But there is no way I could calculate them from the data available. Do your best. Oh, by the way, there's a guardsman waiting to be processed in the other transport." "Processed?" The doctor gave Catalina a quizzical look. "He contaminated the crime scene, trailed blood right the way across it before I could stop him. He's been designated as evidence until you release him. Hopefully, I won't need to dissect him, my dear, much as I may want to." The doctor shot another wink Catalina's way. "Come on, lads, we have a crime scene to process. Perhaps it hasn't been too badly contaminated." "Dark Eagle, protocol active. Dark Eagle, subject deployed. Analyzing. Deviation from normal parameters. Analyzing." Catalina followed the doctor, content to observe for the moment. She did not want her lack of practical experience to show, nor to hinder the doctor in his work. Technically, with her remit from the Triad of Doctrina, she could have formed a basic premise from the scene, and based solely on her suspicions, accuse and execute any member or members of the colony for the crime. Metellus had, to Catalina's relief, impressed upon her the importance of thorough work. While we can work on our suspicions, we must be mindful that we are not acting hastily. Even an investigator can be guilty of the sin of pride. Our suspicions are based on sorry, I lost my place there. Our suspicions are based on evidence, not mere gut feeling or hunches. The lack of requirement for evidence inherent in our order is a responsibility, not a gift. If we accuse the wrong person, though through pride or sloth, then the empire is not acting with sole invictus authority. It is acting with yours. Be mindful that you make the right choices, not the easy one. The lack of evidentiary requirement is for use when evidence would be impossible to obtain. Individuals guilty of corruption often have any evidence linking them to the crimes they commit destroyed. This is when our remit for suspicion comes into play. Right, guys, I really hoped you enjoyed that. If you want to read more of Martin's work, I'm going to be placing a link below. I hoped you enjoyed that. And as always, like, subscribe, tell your friends and family. I've been the Gargoyle. I am your reader in the dark.